Oh, good. It's nice to have a pen that doesn't have a refill in it. Christopher Hussey.
Okay.
That's Jesse.
The one time that Ann doesn't take the normal seat. Chris, are you gonna sit over there?
Yep. Why?
Just because you usually sit here and we advised the court reporter that you would be sitting in your normal seat.
Well, I like to sit next to Jesse so he can kick me under the table when necessary.
Then you sit there.
Jesse,
I didn't know that you had some foreplay going on.
Does he ever kick you really? You let me know.
Metaphorically, he has. Generally with cause. Evening, Jonathan.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good.
We actually start deliberation on June 5th?
No, so everything has been
Pushed back.
a month, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
so do we have a hearing on June 5th? Because they have a potential conflict.
I don't know. I'll have to. I
Yeah,
don't know.
That was gonna be one of my questions tonight. What is the schedule? When will we be
What's
doing
the next scheduled hearing? Is it the 5th?
I'm looking right now.
June 5th?
No, we must be meeting.
There's another one that we did in May. There's like a May 22nd or something, I wanna say.
Well,
Oh.
May 20th,
Well, the May 20th to be determined.
to be determined.
But didn't we?
But I think we've got to go through two more testimonials,
Yeah, I've
what have you. Yeah, there's an architect out there someplace that's supposed to
Right,
be
we're also,
consulting.
and we're also
We have the
doing-
other one on May 23rd, don't we?
No, because that's a Friday night.
Marion Street.
They would make it a Friday night.
Oh, it's not?
On the Sabbath.
Yeah, I was looking at the schedule and I didn't see it. Is it off indefinitely? Did you see it?
I did not see it. I have not.
I mean, I
been
thought we
notified.
pushed it to a date certain.
I thought it was May, I thought it was honestly May,
22nd?
I thought that was the 20, maybe that's the 22nd, and then the 20th is for this.
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Three guys in a Honda Civic driving out and sleeping with us. So, I have to interview.
That's him.
Sorry. Anybody know if Jesse knows there's a meeting tonight?
I think he's left his stuff
Oh,
there.
he's-
He must be meeting with Edie. He seems to do that before.
Chris?
Excellent.
Mr. Chair?
Hey, how are you? I haven't seen you in ages.
No,
Yeah.
they don't like us sitting together.
That's it. That's what it is. How'd your 40B go?
We never held it. We
Oh,
pushed it
that's
off,
right. Good.
As Bobby's request.
How are you, Mr. Hussey?
Fine, Mr. Geller, how are you?
How are you?
Fine and dandy. No place I'd rather be,
He's lying already.
and with no one else, I'd rather be there. That part is true.
Are we revising the schedule? Are you going to announce the new progression?
That's our progression.
So this is today.
If it makes any sense to you.
No, No, what I'm talking about is not today's agenda, but the schedule for upcoming meetings.
Maybe.
Is
It's
that-
about as good as I can get.
I
20th
may
is the
have a
next thing.
conflict on the
Tonight?
5th of June.
You a response?
So
I don't know.
tonight is,
We're not gonna get to it tonight,
we're only
so
talking
it's a
transportation
non-issue
tonight.
tonight.
So this is the response.
You mean the
to
schedule?
Comments on here.
Yes, all we're gonna get to in terms of
Maybe
schedule
because
is
we
the
reviewed
20th.
that, and right before
Why?
this meeting,
Is everything else open now?
Maria sent around a response from Beta.
It depends,
Oh, no, here, I'll move over.
what do we have? Oh, yeah. Sit here. That way you can kick me for calling you a yucky.
If you really need to sit here, I don't mind. No, I'll shove over.
I never heard that, and there was something lit.
If you kick me hard enough.
Litvak and Galicia. So the Jews who were incredibly territorial people, depending on where you were from, your ancestors were from. There were different terms that referred to them. The German Jews were called Yekkes.
Who told them that?
Jews,
Who told them Yekkes?
that's a German derivative itself.
Okay, I have to look this
And
up.
the Lithuanian Jews were Litvaks. The Jews from, right, the Jews from the Polish corridor, which became part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, were Galicians.
Galicianos?
Galicianos.
No, that's the Italian. Obviously, when people stand up to speak, you have to remind them to say their name and spell it, particularly since she's new. Okay.
What was that Litva's word?
Litvak.
I'm gonna charge you for this consulting.
You can charge me.
Okay, hang on. Do we have everybody we need? Don't say Steve Schwartz, do you?
He's around, I saw him a minute ago.
I think he's out trying to
You're a funny guy.
Listen, if you can't take it light, you can't take it, so.
Right, but are they telling them?
gonna scream.
Right, they have to take it, yeah, it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, what's the
Right.
deal with that?
Different look, I don't know. Maybe he did it for cancer.
Steve Schwartz.
And he's in the building, I don't think you have to worry about it.
You think we can start without him?
Absolutely.
All right.
This
Good
is-
evening, everybody. We are going to open our hearing. This is a continuation of hearings involving the residents of South Brookline. My name's Jesse Geller. To my immediate left is Mark Zuroff. Next to him is Chris Hussey, Jonathan Book, and Avi Liss. As people may recall, this evening is an opportunity to revisit issues that pertain to traffic. I have a few announcements that I would like to make before we get started. The first is, later in this hearing will be an opportunity for the public to speak. Anyone who wishes to speak, I would ask you again, start by giving us your name, and please, if you do wish to speak, speak into the microphone at the podium. The town and the applicant have agreed to a one-month extension of the public hearing so that the hearings, the outside date is now August 14th of 2014. This is to give the parties an opportunity to further discuss the various issues. I'll now call upon Allison Steinfeld to give us an update of the sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allison Steinfeld, Planning Director. Staff representing the Building and Planning Departments and Town Council's office continue to meet with Chestnut Hill Realty. Discussion has focused on the amount of green space, the number, size, and placement of units, the amount of parking, and the size of the large apartment building. The applicant may present an alternative site plan at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. As mentioned, tonight's hearing will be dedicated to issues pertaining to traffic, and the hearing will be in the following order. We will first hear a presentation of the final reports, and I understand this is going to be done on a question-by-question basis. If people recall, there were a number of questions that were raised both by the ZBA's peer reviewer, which is Beta, as well as by town departments and also by the public. So I think for coherence sake, these topics will be handled on a question-by-question basis, in which we will first hear from the applicant's expert, and then we'll have a response from Beta. Once that concludes, there will then be an opportunity for the board to ask any additional questions it may have, or remaining questions it may have, though you may all feel compelled to just blurt out a question in the middle of the responsa. So you certainly are free to do that. We will then hear from the public, and we'll take some further input from the public based upon what we have heard. And I would ask people to please listen to what other people are asking and what other people are saying. It may help you to concentrate the questions you have. It may, in fact, lead you to further questions.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. So the public, the questions are to be confined to matters of
Traffic.
traffic, not...
Correct.
Okay.
Tonight is focused on traffic. Thank you. Who's here to speak on behalf of the applicant? And actually, before you get started, why don't you introduce each of yourselves?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, public. For the record, my name is Robert Michaud, a managing principal of MDM Transportation Consultants based in Marlborough, Massachusetts. We're the traffic consultant for the applicant. And Brian?
Evening, everyone. Excuse me, Brian Bizel from Beta Group. I'm a senior project engineer. I apologize for not being here in March. I had a pre-planned family vacation, so I'm here. It's, of course, the ZBA and the town's traffic engineer consultant.
As a matter of protocol, we've coordinated with Beta on our responses. We've submitted written responses to their document of March, no, I don't have the exact date, their peer review document of March 20th. And as the board may recall, there were additional comments made at the March 26th ZBA hearing by Beta. And as a matter of providing a comprehensive response, we've actually combined both the written comments from March 20th and the verbal discussion points that were made at that hearing into our response. So what I'd like to do is actually take each of the comments point by point with the overview that we have actually reached agreement or concurrence with Beta on each of the points that were raised. As the board may recall, the peer review from later in March identified that the methodologies employed in the traffic report were in fact consistent with industry practices and protocols. By and large, there weren't really any points of disagreement or open issues. However, there was a request at the subsequent hearing on March 26th to provide supplemental information that would augment that presented in the report, specifically relating to the neighborhood itself. So we'll step through these on a point-by-point basis, and to the extent Beta wishes to corroborate or add comment, Brian will be right next to the podium to do that. So the first comment relates to the study area, which in the peer review comment was deemed to be appropriate for evaluating the impacts of the project. And as indicated, those were the green dots on this map, which included the signalized locations at Independence Drive, the driveways serving the property at multiple locations on Independence Drive, And then, of course, the Asheville Road intersections at South and at Russet. On March 26th, the applicants, the town's engineer, had suggested that we also look at the orange dot areas, which are representative of the local neighborhood street systems of Russet Road, South Street, and Bonad Street, as well as Beverly Road, which, as many are aware, connects to the Baker School. We've also had the opportunity to look at additional supplemental data right on Independence. So we've conducted that for really two reasons. One is to understand the baseline traffic and speed conditions that exist within those neighborhood streets, and secondly, to corroborate or confirm the growth rate assumptions that were employed in the traffic study. The 2014 data that was presented in our response was collected on Independence Drive at the identical location from years past, prior collected data. And when you compare those data, I believe it was 2007 to 2014, the effective growth rate over that time period is less than 0.5%. Our traffic report uses an annual equivalent 1% growth factor. So we've in fact been conservative in the means in which we've evaluated future year growth conditions. We also note that if you look at specific intersections, at South Street, for instance, the town has studied those locations as part of the upgraded signal systems there in mid-2000s. We went back out and manually counted those same locations, again, to compare the growth trends, and those growth trends show to be about 0.25% per year in total entering volume. So on both counts, the information that we've presented in our traffic report is in fact based on a conservative assumption of growth and is therefore valid. And there's some tables and charts that support those findings. For instance, this is the manual counts that compare the data used in the 2013 traffic report to data collected by the town in 2004 for improvements at those locations, showing that we're essentially very stable to flat growth over that 7-year period. The third point, and this relates to the supplemental data collection again, has to do with travel speeds on Independence Drive. Beta has requested that those be quantified. I know it was a point of discussion or comment by the police department, in the vein of identifying what the actual speeds are, this factors into the improvements that we intend for Independence Drive, the traffic calming measures that we'll describe later. The posted regulatory speed limits on Independence Drive is 35 miles an hour. Mechanically collected data over a multi-day period indicates that the average or mean travel speed on Independence Drive is highly consistent with those posted regulatory limits. In the northbound direction, it's 34, and the southbound is 30. If you look at the high end of the range, or what we'll call the 85th percentile travel speeds, the speed at which 85% of the traveling population travels at or below, that speed range is 39 miles an hour northbound, slightly more than the regulatory limit, and 35 miles an hour southbound, identical to the posted limit. The 85th percentile speed is typically the speed that an engineering department, a municipality, or the state would use as the basis for establishing a speed zone, meaning what should be the posted speed limit. So the finding here is that the existing posted limits are in fact consistent with those speeds. The fourth comment had to do with identifying sightline requirements at proposed driveways so that they would demonstrate compliance with the 85th percentile measured speeds. And happily, so they do. The sight lines that are provided at proposed intersections along Independence Drive exceed 500 feet and exceed the requirements even on the basis of 85th percentile measured speed. The fifth point is really an on-site design issue. It had to do with comments on ensuring that sight lines would be adequate and unimpaired at the garage entrance points within the property. The specific design is subject to ongoing review with Beta, It's part of the site plan and drainage design review, and it's really not something that we're intending to provide or elaborate on this evening in this forum. It's really a site plan issue, but that will be resolved under that process. Sixth comment had to do with police department records and request to obtain local data to ensure that what was presented in the traffic report was consistent. The traffic report relies upon data provided by the Mass DOT that originates from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. That data, as originally presented in that study, indicated that there's a relatively low crash incidence in the study area, meaning when one looks at the crash rate and compares it to a statewide or district-wide average, we demonstrate that the actual rates are well below average. The local records corroborate that. They're highly consistent with the DOT data, and we have not identified any specific locations that would suggest the need for safety countermeasures. This is a graphical depiction of that information which we obtained from the local police for the period 2011, 12, and 13, color-coded by year, and you'll see that the crashes over that 3-year period are pretty well dispersed along Independence Drive. There's some outliers here. Beyond the Baker School, there's a couple of incidents. I believe one of them had to do with vehicle malfunction, but by and large, there isn't any specific location. You could say there's a crash hotspot. When you look at, in more detail, the crash rates for the individual intersections along Independence Drive, you'll see that the crash rate is about 0.12 or less. That is compared against a statewide average of 0.58, so it's about 3 times lower than average. It's not, nothing is indicating or suggesting the need for countermeasures. Here's the actual data, 14 crashes over that 3-year period, 3 of which in some form involved pedestrian activity, and that becomes a valid point of information as we consider improvements to Independence Drive that will not only enhance safety for traveling, for folks using the roadway, bicyclists for instance, but also for pedestrians that are crossing it. The 7th comment had to do with trip generation estimates, and we've concurred, Beta has concurred with us that the rates used in the traffic report are in fact appropriate. They're based on a suburban standard and do not take credit for the likelihood that folks will use some form of non-single occupant vehicle for travel to or from the site. What that means is when you look at census data for the area, we know that there's a relatively high percentage of people who either walk, bike, take the shuttle, or in some instances use the MBTA bus. We haven't taken credit for that. We've used this unadjusted suburban standard, which Beta has found to be appropriate. No further response required. 8, traffic calming. The basis of the presentation on March 26th and the request for supplemental data really had its genesis in trying to identify an existing baseline of volumes and speeds in local neighborhood streets, and that that would allow an evaluation of whether or not additional traffic calming measures would be appropriate for that neighborhood to address if, for instance, there was a speeding issue, or there was a high crash location, or there were higher than normal volumes, or conditions that would suggest the need for those types of measures. Beyond those particular neighborhood streets, we know that there are also initiatives that would probably make sense on Independence Drive, and we'll talk about those momentarily. What MDM has done is to look at each of the neighborhood streets that were identified by Beta. We've inventoried the existing features of those neighborhood streets. You'll see in this diagram that we've looked at the sidewalk systems that are shown in dashed orange annotation. There's a comprehensive and consistent system of sidewalks that exist in that entire neighborhood setting. There are already traffic calming elements in place that were provided by the town over the past years. For instance, the chicane element, the mini roundabout of sorts, I guess you'd call it, on South Street. That's a traffic calming element intended to slow traffic down and to control it at that particular location. At other locations at Russet Road, Bonad, and South, you'll see that there are a series of four-way or all-way stops. That is yet another type or form of traffic calming that requires drivers to come to a complete stop and then proceed. The only location where that type of measure is not currently provided is at Asheville and Russet, at that location. So the context of this neighborhood suggests that many of the elements that you would consider for traffic calming are already in place, with the exception of that one location. That said, we've also looked at the speed characteristics. These speed characteristics were measured using radar recorder equipment over a minimum 24-hour period to capture speed characteristics during peak hours, non-peak hours, nighttime, morning, midday, and over the course of an entire day on average. What's presented here is a snapshot of those results for each of the streets that Beta has asked that we examine. So Russet Road, for instance, these are all 30-mile-an-hour local roadways. Right? That's the regulatory speed limit. So if you look at Russet Road, the 85th percentile speeds for Russet Road vary from 21 to 23 miles per hour. They're well below the regulatory posted speed limit there. Bonad Street, 28 to 27, slightly higher, but still reasonably below the posted regulatory limit. Asheville Road, 20 to 21 miles an hour. This is the component that really provides existing access to Hancock Village. If you look at South Street, which has a higher posted limit at 35, its 85th percentile speeds are exactly consistent with the posted regulatory limits, 34 to 35. Beverly Road, 30-mile-an-hour road, has 85th ranging from 27 to 29. So we're not seeing any aspect of measured speeds that are inconsistent with posted limits on neighborhood streets that would suggest the need for some form of control. From a volume perspective, we've also used mechanical equipment to collect hourly and daily traffic volumes on neighborhood streets at those same locations. No surprise that Bonad and Russet are very low volume local roadways, less than 500 vehicle trips per day. I think the hourly numbers on that are about 60 vehicles per hour. South Street is actually a collector distributor road. It has a higher volume of just under 2,700 trips over the course of a day. Beverly Road, which provides connection to Baker at 1,600 per day, and of course Independence at almost 14,000. So this provides a context to understand that the local roadway traffic volumes are in fact low volume streets. And based on the assessment of the traffic report, will remain low volume streets even with the development in place. So the conclusion of that is that we don't believe, on the basis of the lack of crash experience, low volume traffic conditions, the presence of existing traffic calming elements, and the relatively low travel speeds that are consistent with regulatory limits, that any additional measures are warranted within the neighborhood street system. Comment 9, there was a question that related to clarifying trip distribution assumptions and specific traffic volume increases in local neighborhood streets. We've essentially developed a clarifying graphic that would indicate for each component of the project how many trips are being generated using the suburban trip rate and how they get assigned to the roads. This is the Independence Drive corridor going to the north. This is the Russet Road connection, Bonad, south. This is the highest concentration of residential units, which would be accessed by Asheville Road. At the highest concentration of units, that connection through the neighborhood streets shows increases of, in the weekday morning peak hour condition, about 34 vehicle trips or less on many of these streets. If you look at Russet Road between Asheville and VFW Parkway, for instance, 22 vehicle increase over the course of an hour is predicted. As you go toward Independence, it's 34. It's one vehicle every 2 minutes. That's the average increase. South Street is smaller. You look at Beverly Road, it's only 5. You look at Independence Drive south of Thornton, 9. Fairly inconsequential numbers, and similar for weekday PM peak hour periods. So we've provided this information. It shows that while there may be some variability in local distribution patterns, this provides a pretty good sense as to what that level of increase is. It will not have a material effect on your ability to travel on these roads. There's ample capacity, and the documented speed conditions suggest that there really aren't any other measures that need to be in place. Capacity analysis, Beta has indicated, was done in accordance with industry standards and is in fact valid, using the volumes that we've just described as being, or relying on a 1% annual growth rate, right? So we've used a conservative assumption. As I've stated in prior testimony, the level of service analysis, the capacity analysis shows that in every instance there is literally no change in operating level from a no-build condition to a build condition as a result of this project. There are no locations anywhere here that operate at level of service E or F. They're all well below capacity, level of service A, B, C, and in some cases D, which relates to the left turn movement from Geary Road onto Independence. But you'll see that all of the public ways and streets here operate at level of service A, B, or C with no change as a result of the project. Their comment regarding trip distribution also made note of the fact that there are multiple access points that are provided that help disperse that impact over a number of local roadway streets. 2 of those driveways along Independence and 1 at Asheville. We've recapped that at no location on any street are we anticipating an increase that would change the character, nature, or operating conditions of those roads. Number 12, the Beta comments suggested the need to expand the TDM program. The TDM, of course, stands for Transportation Demand Management. The idea behind TDM is to get people out of their cars to use other forms of transportation or to perhaps carpool or do things of that nature. So, as originally proposed, Hancock Village currently operates a shuttle service. It's a very well-utilized service. Under this application, that shuttle service would be expanded based on demonstrated demand and need. Second, the application will include the provision of secure bicycle storage facilities and racks throughout the development. Third, there is a substantial integrated system of sidewalks that will be provided that not only connect to the existing sidewalk system within Hancock Village, but also provide a contiguous connection to public sidewalk systems that lead to destinations like the Baker School, for instance. And fourth, this relates to the Zipcar service. There's currently Zipcar service that is provided with, I believe, 2 Zipcar parking positions and vehicles. The applicant has reached out already to Zipcar to understand to what extent that can be expanded. Zipcar evaluates the need for that each spring. And so the applicant, on an annual basis, is willing to discuss the idea of expanding Zipcar capability and supply each spring to the extent that it's warranted. 13, the Russet Road, Asheville Road intersection, as I mentioned earlier, is under stop control only for the Asheville approach. We've evaluated, based on objective criteria, whether or not a warrant would be met for installation of an all-way stop control at that one location. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD, provides specific volume-based criteria that must be considered before implementing that type of control. When we look at those criteria, the volumes simply aren't high enough to warrant that form of control at this particular location, nor, in our opinion, would the volume conditions be met in many of the locations in the neighborhood where all-way stop control is currently provided. That said, there may be other conditions that would indicate the need for that form of control. that are not volume-based. They're a little more subjective, and are perhaps the reason that the town has opted to implement that at other locations. So the applicant is very much willing to work with the town to fund and implement an always stop control to the extent the town deemed it appropriate at Asheville and Russet. Comment 14, traffic calming measures. We've discussed the data that relates to the local neighborhood street system. We don't believe that there are any supplemental or additional measures that are needed beyond the always stop control, for instance, which in and of itself could be a traffic control, traffic calming element. Traffic calming really is most appropriately focused on Independence Drive, based on our survey of pedestrian activity, slightly above average travel speeds, crash experience, and other factors. And so we have been commissioned by the applicant, by the proponent, to prepare a conceptual plan that would indicate those types of features for Independence Drive. This diagram shows the context of the improvements at a very 20,000 foot level. So let me zoom in on this to better describe what's being proposed here. This intersection happens to be the intersection of Sherman at Thornton with Independence. This is the busiest volume location along this stretch of road. It currently has a pedestrian crossing from one edge to the other that is just under 50 feet long. It's a rather long crossing. It's also a location where a documented crash experience does exist as it relates to pedestrians. And so the notion here is to provide curb bump outs that would formalize parking along the edge of the road, and what would also at the same time allow for a much shorter crossing and a more prominent crossing for pedestrians. This crossing length goes from just under 50 feet to 38 feet and could be augmented with some form of traffic control that we'll speak to in a moment, known as either flashing beacons that are either push-button controlled or motion activated, or hawk type beacons, which would require vehicles to physically stop when a button is pushed. All right, so there's two forms of control that could be used, and either one of those forms of control would provide much more prominent visibility to pedestrians and pedestrian activity by motorists. You'll also notice that in addition to formalizing the parking on the curb edges and shortening the crosswalk, that there are bicycle lanes provided on each side of the road. So taken together, all of these elements would meet the objectives of a design philosophy known as complete streets, designing facilities that would accommodate not only the needs of vehicular flow, but flow of non-motorized modes of transportation, whether they're by bicycle or foot. And so that's what the applicant has developed conceptually for the corridor. As you focus further north at the proposed east driveway here, just north of Geary Road, right, the west driveway here, the the Beverly Road signal here, that same cross-section would continue with curb bump outs at the east driveway. Again, the shortened crossing. Again, the either flashing beacons or hawk-type beacon control at that location. And you'll see that there's a transition that brings that cross-section back to the 4-lane section that currently exists at the signal at Beverly Road. Right? So there's a nice, easy transition from that single lane back to your 2-lane section as you approach the signal. And likewise, if you're traveling through the signal, you'd have a nice, gentle transition back to a single lane with proper transitions, curb, to get you to that driving position. So this type of design is not only compliant with complete streets philosophy and standards, but would actually provide a more coherent driving experience for folks who are not familiar with the area. Today, it's not uncommon for people who are traveling in the outer lane, the curbside lane, to realize once they've gotten through the signal that, gee, there's someone parked there and I need to quickly get over to the center lane. This eliminates that confusion and conflict. Finally, There's an existing crosswalk at Beverly Road, which is at a somewhat of a skew. It actually results in a very long crossing that's in excess of 50 feet. This is the crossing that you would use to get to the Baker School. This concept would have that crosswalk realigned so that it was at a 90-degree alignment. Shortens it up quite a bit, and would enhance safety. So taken in combination, this is what Beta had suggested might be appropriate for the quarter. We've developed this concept. It's certainly not an engineering level design drawing, but it really provides a framework for continued discussion with the town on implementing something that makes sense and that is warranted. This is an example of a street where this has actually been implemented within the past few years. This is a Mass DOT funded project. You'll see that there's a bicycle lane here with curb bump outs from side streets, formalized curbside parking, single travel lanes in either direction, prominent crosswalks, which are of a brick color in this particular example. So this is a good snapshot of what we're suggesting makes sense for Independence Drive. As it relates to traffic controls, Beta wanted to ensure that a full signal was not warranted. So we've done, using MUTCD criteria, a signal warrant analysis for full signal control, both at Geary Road and at Thornton Sherman, and the volume conditions simply don't warrant full signal control. Volumes just aren't there. The MUTCD, as mentioned earlier, does meet criteria for pedestrian hybrid beacons, which we, in our professional opinion, would be the appropriate form of control at both of those locations in the plan. This is the Hawk-type system, the high-intensity activated crosswalk. This is a push-button activated control. So if you're a pedestrian and want to get to the other side of the street, you push the button, the signal goes red, people stop accordingly. This is a regulatory, enforceable type form of traffic control. The secondary type would be more of an advisory type control. This is a beacon cross alert system. This is an example that was actually implemented on State Highway. It's an accepted, it's on their accepted equipment list now. So you'll see that there are prominently displayed signs, prominently marked crossing, in this case with a supplemental sign in the middle of the crosswalk. Beacons actually are mounted on these poles and get activated, in this particular example, by motion. So if you approach as a pedestrian, you don't even have to push a button. There's a motion detection. These beacons then light up. The motorist sees that there's something happening and is more aware that there's a pedestrian crossing the road. Comment 17 related to on-site parking. It's really a point of clarification, and it does relate to a site plan issue. It's not really a traffic issue per se, so I won't go into great detail, but there are 345 new parking spaces being proposed in the application, which relates to a parking ratio of 1.78. Pure objective statement. There was a reference back to a parking ratio of 1.4, and I think that related to the equivalent overall parking ratio when you took into effect all of the spaces that currently exist within the Hancock Village property. So as an individual application, individual project, its parking ratio is 1.78, not 1.42. Comment 18, Beta suggested the need for a crosswalk between buildings 1 and 2, which will in fact be incorporated into the design sets through the ongoing Beta and town review of those plans. Comment 19, emergency vehicle circulation. We've discussed this on several occasions. We've done auto turn analysis that was provided to Beta in an electronic format. The nature of that analysis was to model the largest vehicle type that would need to access the property, which is a tower truck. It's 42 feet long. It's a substantial vehicle. We've run computerized models that would indicate that for each of the design elements, whether they're circular cul-de-sac elements, hammers, or hammerhead type designs, that there is ample maneuvering area to accommodate that largest vehicle type. I know it is standard practice in the industry to conduct this form of analysis to ensure that you have ample curb radii, ample roadway width, dimension, layout to accommodate either one full circle movement, a traditional cul-de-sac design, or a single backing movement and a hammerhead design, both of which are accepted design practice through precedent here in Brookline, as well as other communities that abut Brookline. Comment 20 relates to that same issue. The question was whether or not the roadway width of 22 feet satisfies the needs for emergency access and circulation. It does, based on the computer modeling, and is also consistent with the zoning requirements in town. Comment 21, pedestrian safety. This comment was described or discussed at the March 26th hearing, and it really relates to sidewalks and making sure that for every building being proposed that there's a coherent and connected way to get from that building to a destination. The answer is that there is a fully integrated system of sidewalks that are being proposed that allow for a connection to Baker School, for instance, without ever having to walk within a travel lane. Right? You're either on a sidewalk or you're at a crossing point. And this illustrates for the existing Hancock Village where those sidewalk systems exist, right? So you've got these dashed areas here, all of which connect individual building units to sidewalks along the street system that serves Hancock Village, ultimately out into Independence Drive, and likewise on the other side. The proposed development shown in red are the connections that would integrate with the sidewalk systems within Hancock Village, or would also connect to the sidewalk systems in Independence Drive. The one missing link today is actually on Asheville, right? So if you were walking down Asheville today, there is a sidewalk there, but it sort of ends. There's nothing at the terminal end of that. This application envisions an extension of that sidewalk to connect to the existing sidewalk system that currently serves this entire neighborhood. And again, this shows the pretty comprehensive system of those existing sidewalks. Comment 22, again, a verbal point, not in the written peer review, but related to the need or request, rather, to provide information for VFW Parkway at Independence Drive, data for that. That location is in Boston. It's a location that is likely to sustain an impact of less than one new car every 5 minutes, inconsequential, and there's no useful value or purpose to providing data or any analysis of that location for those reasons. This, again, recaps that as you approach VFW Parkway, which is a signalized location, that the effect of this project will be between 9 and 11 new vehicle trips. It's inconsequential and really not necessary to provide any level of analysis for that Boston-based location. Comment 23 relates to the data request that was made for local neighborhood streets and the notion that there would be increases in traffic on those local streets. So we were asked to identify volume and speed characteristics, and we've done that as previously described. We know that the impact of the project on local neighborhood streets like Bonad or Russet is about one vehicle every 2 minutes or so. It's not a large impact. And again, that recaps those volumes. Comment 24, Russet Asheville all-way stop control analysis was requested again during that hearing, was provided. Doesn't meet the volume-based warrants, but the applicant is, proponent is certainly willing to implement it at the discretion and in cooperation with the town. Comment 25 had to do with roadway width standards being applied to the project. That's a specific design comment that will be addressed in the ongoing review with Beta as part of the site plan and drainage review. Really not subject to tonight's discussion. Comment 26, comment to expand shuttle and zip car services, which the proponent has committed to do to the extent that demand warrants. Zip car controls how many spaces they need and desire, and how many vehicles get positioned based on that demand. If they're asked to look at it, they typically evaluate that in the spring. The proponent will ask them every spring, can we get an extra car? Do we need an extra car? And certainly Chestnut Hill Realty currently, the proponent actually controls the existing shuttle. That can be expanded based, again, on demonstrated need and demand. Comment 27, Independence and Sherman signal control. I have to recap this for a second. The prior statement was, look at the need for full operating signals at that location. Simply don't meet the warrants or criteria, but we do meet the criteria for a Hawk or a beacon-type system, which the proponent is willing to implement. Comment 28 relates again to the parking supply ratio, which just objectively is 1.78, point of clarification. Comment 29, ensuring that sight lines at driveway entrances are unimpeded. That's a sight line, a site plan comment that will be addressed in more detail as part of the site plan process, review process undergoing with Beta. Comment 30, ensuring proper crosswalk location. There were specific comments made to specific locations of crosswalks within the development, which will again be addressed as part of the ongoing discussions with Beta and site plan and drainage review. And finally, we're getting near the end. Comment 31, question relates to a provision of a construction management plan and identifying specific measures of control during construction. It is customary practice to provide a construction management plan following the issuance of applicable permits, but prior to construction, that would identify appropriate truck travel routes, truck restrictions, hour of construction activity, deliveries, worker vehicle parking hours, and locations to the extent that is not provided on the site, material laydown areas, and other features. So the CMP will endeavor to avoid and minimize disruption to traffic and parking on local neighborhood streets. That's the objective of construction management practices. That will be provided, but it is only provided once permits are issued and we know what the project is and what the parameters of the project contain. Comment 32, Independence Drive improvements. Beta suggested the need to identify complete streets design elements, which were described earlier as including bike lanes, parking aisles, curb bump outs, reduced pedestrian crossings, and pedestrian controls. And comment 33 really relates back to the safety issue. There was a discussion of the applicability and appropriateness of hammerhead-type design elements. We've evaluated these elements and have demonstrated through computerized modeling that they provide sufficient area for a single vacuum movement to leave the scene of an incident. It's an acceptable design practice. It's a design practice that's been used in Brookline. It's been used in other communities, and it's also a design practice that's endorsed and cited by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, in their Green Book publication. In fact, this is an excerpt from that publication that would indicate the various types of, as they call them, cul-de-sacs or dead-end streets that in some cases involve a circular element, semicircular element, an L-shaped hammerhead-type design, a T-type hammerhead design, a Y-type hammerhead design, or a sideways T-type design. So there's various ways to achieve the required maneuvering areas for these types of projects for those emergency vehicles that may need to use them. Local examples we've covered in prior testimony to include locations in not only Brookline, but Needham, Newton, and other locations. The most proximate, perhaps, is the Olmsted Hill project, Fisher Hill. This is the Fisher Hill development as it was approved by the town. It consists of a single roadway that comes to a dead end at this location and has a hammerhead-type design, more of a Y-type hammerhead design consistent with the AASHTO standard. That Y-type design, when you run computer models through it, shows the same kind of maneuvering issues that are being proposed for this particular project. Another example of that, more of a T-type dead-end hammerhead design for a project in Needham, Greendale Avenue. This is another example of a hammerhead T-type design in Newton, all approved within the past several years. So these are common design elements that are recognized by publication and practice. Hammond's Wood, another example. Comment 34, revised capacity analysis. To the extent growth patterns were documented to be more than 1% per year, Beta suggested the need for a revised analysis. That's not the case. We're actually guessing high on growth. It's at 1% annual growth. It's more than twice the actual experience on Independence Drive. So we don't need to revisit the capacity analysis. It's valid as submitted. That really concludes the responses. If Brian would like to add anything to that? Yeah, so let me make sure this. So I'm going to list that.
Hello, everyone. Don't worry, I'm not going through all 34 questions or comments. Our March 20th letter detailed in the conclusion really the outstanding issues, and then we issued a letter this afternoon that brings a follow-up. I'm not sure if you have that. But essentially, Bob went over what was requested and what the results were. I just want to talk a little bit about why things were requested, just to give a little clarification of what we were looking for and what information we were hoping to gain and what that information does for us. So the first point was the traffic volumes, as Bob had discussed. The traffic study used existing counts the way they should. They did a growth factor for no build, as they should. They assumed 1%. We just wanted to make sure that that 1% was enough. So we had them go out and collect traffic volumes, which were a few years on now since they collected their last ATRs, and as you can see here, 2007 and 2014 shows that there's much less than 1% per year. So that means that their traffic volumes and their analysis are appropriate. While they were doing these counts, the automated counts, we also wanted them to get the speed data. The speed data on Independence Drive we wanted them to collect that so that we can do the stopping sight distance requirements at the two driveways. They had based it on the speed limit, the posted speed limit. We just wanted to make sure if people are driving faster than the posted speed limit and you base the stopping sight distance requirements on that, you're not really providing a safe intersection. In this case, the speeds are below or near the speed limit, and there is enough sight distance to meet the stopping sight distance requirements. So again, there's no further analysis needed on that. The crash data we wanted the Brookline Police Department crash data. We knew that their crash data, your crash data, excuse me, included some information about crashes with pedestrians, and most notably at Sherman Road. We'll get more to that. They collected the data from the police department, and it did show, what we knew it had. So that came into play when we were looking for the redesign of Independence Drive. Number 3 is the TDM measures. They have in the last MDM letter, they have committed to providing the TDM measures of the increasing the shuttle service, discussing with Zipcar and everything that Bob had discussed, so we are satisfied with the response there. Our recommendation would be any decision that you make, there should be requirements or conditions that require them to stick to the TDM measures, most notably through, I want to make sure I get this term right, through a signed TDM agreement as part of the permitting process. You can get information on that from your engineering department. That's just basically a written, if it's in your decision and new owners come into the property, the future owners will be committed to continue the TDM as these owners would, or let's just say they end up being bad neighbors and they decide to stop the shuttle service. Well, having that in your decision will not allow him to do that. The fourth one is discussing the traffic calming in the residential neighborhood. We have not a discrepancy, but it's my response in today's letter was vague. As you can see in this diagram, we had them collect, let me back up, we had them collect traffic volume and traffic speed data along all the local roadways. And that was to determine if there really is an issue with speeding or other issues that traffic calming would solve. Oh. I'm breaking your, how do you get the pointer up? The issue with providing, and I'm sorry, I don't think the pointer will show up on the TV. The issue with providing traffic calming measures on certain streets is that you end up just pushing it. So say we did, right now there's existing traffic calming on South Street because that is a collector road. If we put just traffic calming on Russet Road, you would just push people onto Bonad Road. So that's not really what we're after. In this case, we have the stop signs at all of the intersections. So if someone really, doesn't want to deal with the stop signs, the idea would be that they go to South Street. Of course, there's now a stop sign on South Street as well, so it might not work. There is the potential for including additional traffic calming measures along Bonad and Russet. This way you really try to push people to South Street. We're non-committal at this point. There's no definite results that say how well traffic calming measures work to push vehicles to a different path, so to say. We know traffic calming works for speed issues and for safety issues. We don't know how well it works to redirect vehicles. So if it's something that the town and the board really feel strongly about wanting, then we could discuss, different things we can do. But at this point, we're kind of being non-committal. The all-way stop was discussed at Asheville Road and Russet Road. It doesn't meet stop control warrants, but since there are other stop controls in the area that are also not met, all of the existing ones, with the exception of the South Street one, probably does meet the warrant. But the other ones on Russet Road and Bonad Road probably don't meet the warrants either. I'm not the engineer stamping the plan, so if someone else wants to install them, that's between the town and those engineers. Some of the other traffic calming has to deal with, of course, the extensive work that we are requesting on Independence Drive. Basically, what we're looking for, why we requested these changes, is currently there's 2 lanes of travel in each direction on Independence Drive, and then sporadically, as that blue car is shown, both those blue cars, you'll have somebody parked. These are legal parking spaces. There's no signage against their parking. On both ends, well, on the Boston end of the corridor, there is only one travel lane. So we thought it would make sense to continue that through and provide the bike lanes and then also the shorter pedestrian crossing, which Bob discussed. Right now, it's 48 feet, essentially, from where this crosswalk is to this crosswalk. You can see how much shorter it would be. It would be down to, in this design, it's 32 feet, 5 for the bike lane, 11 for the travel lane, 11 for the travel lane, and 5 for the bike lane. So that's significantly shorter. One of our requests is that when we get further into the design of this, is that you actually move the bike lanes to be on the outside of the parking, essentially along the curb. This is known as a cycle track. It provides a lot more protection for the bicyclists, and it would also shorten this. It would increase this bump out, shortening this cross to 22 feet. The pedestrians would now only be crossing the 2 travel lanes. They would have crossed the bike lane back here separately. What this does for the bicyclists is right now you have a car parked here. Well, they need to get into that spot and they need to get out of that spot, so they're crossing the bike lane. They also, which is a big concern and a big issue, is they open their door without looking. And I say I open my door without looking when I park next to a bike lane. It's just not something we're used to yet. So we have a lot of accidents and crashes with bicyclists hitting a driver opening his door. So by moving that to the outside, you have far less interaction because there's probably or may not be a passenger in the car, but also the plan would include a buffer zone. So you narrow the parking as much as you can, and then you provide a buffer. This way, when someone does open their door, it's not into the bike lane. Worst case scenario, if they do open their door into the bike lane, in this case, the bike has, if they have time to react, they're falling into the sidewalk. They're not falling into oncoming or traffic that's driving, you know, in the same direction as they are. So this is the latest. This is part of NACTO design. It's trying to, you know, get the bicyclists on the outside instead of in the middle of the vehicles. Another minor detail in here is that personally I prefer to have this beacon. If it was a post-mounted beacon, I'll get into the Hawks in a minute. I'd rather have it on the short side, the near side of the crosswalk. It's just more visual for the driver as they approach from here. You're gonna see the flashing beacon, the pedestrians behind it or further away, not the opposite way around. So that's something, you know, that the final design would have to incorporate. As for the Hawk or the flashing yellow beacons, the warrants are met for the Hawk, so in my letter from today, I mistakenly said it was only met for this intersection. It's actually met for both intersections, so we would recommend either the flashing beacons as shown on this plan, or the Hawk system would be on a mast arm going out over the roadway. The Hawk system, as you saw in the picture, is a new traffic signal. That's the downside right now. Most people haven't seen these before. I've never driven through one. I've seen them obviously professionally, but they work the same way. The red light is going to get people to stop more. The idea is they'll stop more than a flashing yellow beacon that would be on the side of the road for the pedestrians. So it's really just a matter of how aggressive does the town want to be? Do they want to implement, you know, complete pedestrian safety and have a little driver discomfort and not know what they're supposed to do, or would they want to do it incrementally maybe and do the flashing beacons on the side? We've had success with the flashing beacons, specifically in this case now that we'll be down to one travel lane in each direction. You have two travel lanes in one direction, and the flashing beacon on the side of the road isn't going to mean anything to the guy who's driving in the left-hand lane. And then finally, the site circulation. The only standards as far as traffic that we can really hold them to is the auto turn design that Bob showed. We have more comments from our site engineers that are reviewing everything, but traffic-wise, it's really the auto turn is our gospel and the standard that we have to hold them to. These designs, even though they're small scale, I have them bigger. When you zoom in, they do stay in the road on the site roadways, and they do provide access to the site. So that's all I had. I'm sure you've had enough of us talking at you. If anyone has questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions at this time?
Because there was some discrepancy or wasn't clear from the testimony from the prior hearing, is the parking is being provided at 1.78 spaces per dwelling unit. Is that an appropriate?
Right. I won't.
No.
There's been discrepancy. I think I know where you're going. You're wanting to know what they should be providing, in my opinion, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, it is, for this location,
Right.
is sort of this suburban urban, and I realize it's sort of both.
Right.
Is 1.78 the appropriate parking ratio?
In my opinion, that would be on the high side. I haven't done one specifically in Brookline, and even if you do, obviously Brookline is much different out these windows than it is at the site. But in Watertown, where they're close to the bus depot there, and in Brighton, where there's only bus transportation or MBTA bus transportation, we've seen as low of a demand as just over 1 car per unit, and we've seen it go up to about 1.5. My recommendation in these settings is 1.4 to 1.5.
Okay. Thank you. I have another question. So, in the discussion about traffic calming on Russet Road, and you had made a comment, I think, in your letter today and then just now, that would just push traffic onto a different road. So the question is that a bad thing? Is it an advisable thing? Are there roads that are better suited for
Right.
the traffic, or based upon the analysis, is the additional traffic to be generated from this project, is it, for lack of a better word, you know, inconsequential enough or low enough that it really doesn't matter whether it's on Russet or on South Street, if that's, you know, where
Right.
it was pushed to?
The preference would be to have the vehicles on South Street. So my recommendation would be any traffic calming measures that are going to be implemented on Russet Road should also be implemented on Bonad Road, because otherwise, you know, if someone's willing to drive down now Russet Street currently, and you put traffic calming, and now they say, well, I don't want to do that anymore, I don't want to deal with it, they're just going to go one over. They're not going to go all the way to South Street, because they would be going on South Street now if that's what they were looking for. So whatever you do on Russet Road should be done on Bonad Road. The issue there is now you're putting them on to Asheville Road and Gossamer Road for longer. So that, you know, there's really no perfect answer, but the preference would be to get them to South Street as quick as possible, except if you're right along here at Asheville Road, you're obviously not happy that I'm saying that right now. So there's no one answer that's right for this whole neighborhood.
And does just the addition of the stop sign, I mean, I know there are stop signs there now, the addition of is that one of those measures that would encourage people to
Right.
do that if they don't have, so that they don't have to keep stopping at every intersection every couple, 100 feet or so?
Right, so the stop signs aren't typically used for traffic calming, because what they found is that it actually has people stop and then they speed up and stop. But since they're here already, it does make sense to finish the equation essentially and put one at all four of the internal intersections. If they're, you know, currently if they're coming out and they're stopping at Russet Road, putting up a stop sign at Asheville Road isn't gonna all of a sudden make them go to South Street though. So I don't want anyone to think that the stop sign, or that I'm implying that the stop sign is gonna solve anyone from ever driving down Russet Road again. It might, you know, these stop signs together might be enough to get people to go to South Street, but again, with the stop sign on South Street, you know, they're gonna experience stops either way, so. You would do additional, you know, there could be a request for additional measures on here that basically, you know, if you're stopping at all three no matter what, but now you have a chicane or something else along these roads, well, that might, you know, deter someone to get onto South Street. It might not, you know, it's really up to each driver and how aggressive they are and just what they'd rather do. Would they rather sit in a little bit more traffic on South Street when they get to the signal, or would they rather go over a speed table, or, you know, whatever the answer is. So there's really no way to give you an exact answer of putting this in will stop anyone from this project ever traveling down these local roads. It's always going to be a driver's decision.
Can I just,
Yep.
just to follow up on that, I think the next logical question is, are the additional units, what is the impact on the flow? Is it, and I think you did ask, is it consequential or is it inconsequential? I mean, I understand it's gonna increase to some degree, but, you know, and I know it's everyone's job to determine what that increase will be, but is it material or not material in your opinion?
Here are the existing daily volumes. So let's just use Russet Road as an example. It's 490 vehicles. The trip distribution would add 43 during the peak hours. So that's 10%. You can assume that the PM peak hour is about 10% of the daily total. So you would be doubling the Russet Road traffic. Now, can Russet Road handle another 430 daily trips? The answer is yes, you know, because the volumes are so low. Percent increase is pretty significant though. If you have one car, you add one car, it's a 100% increase. If you have 1,000 and add one, no one's gonna notice. So there will be more traffic, but the roads are able to handle it.
Thank you.
Mr. Hussey?
I happened to be driving down Russet Road today, and it seemed to me there's parking on both sides, and it seemed to be pretty narrow once you have two cars there.
Right.
Both for just regular traffic, but with emergency traffic, it could be a problem. Does it make any sense to make that and Bonad one way, opposite directions?
I guess not. No, I mean, we'd have to look at it more. and see what the interactions were with Independence Drive on, on each end. But, it seems like no matter what the engineering study shows. I did want to mention, and I said it quickly in the letter, is that the Orange Street parking could also be considered a traffic, I lost the term, I'm sorry.
Calming.
Traffic calming, thank you, I lost the calming. A traffic calming measure. If people don't feel comfortable driving down the road now with cars parked on the road, well, a chicane does essentially the same thing. It narrows the road, it makes the driver feel insecure, they slow down, or they choose not to go that way. So would additional traffic calming measures work even more? I'm not sure. You would also be losing parking wherever we implemented whatever measure we put in. So there's a lot of give and take with traffic calming.
What about the possibility, as my brother here suggested, of parking only on one side on those roads?
Again, that'd be up to the neighbors, and it would also be up to the engineering department, and enforcement would be the other issue. You'd have to put signs up on whatever side. It would, in my estimation, the only thing it would do is encourage people to drive on Russet Road, because now you're putting people on one side of the road, and you're leaving more travel width, so they're going to be more encouraged to drive that way. So I wouldn't personally recommend it in this case.
Okay.
Just following on that thought, I live on a road where there's only parking on one side. Sorry. I live on a road where there's only parking on one side nearby. It works in my neighborhood. It does prevent, I think, to a degree, the possibility of children running out on both sides. I was just wondering, it's been asked and you've answered it, but I'm just wondering if that really isn't a possibility for allowing traffic flow to be better while not necessarily making it a freeway.
Right. It's a give and take. There would be more, pedestrians would have more visibility without, on-street parking, obviously, but it would probably also encourage increased speeds and maybe increased demand, increased traffic volume. So it's a give and take. It's really, if you have one existing issue, you may do something if you're trying to alleviate that issue. In this case, to me, taking out the parking would create the issue of encouraging extra volume onto those roads.
All right, and then just backtracking a little bit, there was a representation that the increased occupancy in this development would add, I think, on average, some number of cars per hour. I'm more concerned about how many cars it adds at rush hour when there's higher volume, because we know that nobody's driving at 2:30 well, maybe that's school hours, but maybe 4 o'clock
Sure.
in the afternoon or 11 o'clock in the morning. So what is the real effect of, not the average, but what actual increase takes place at the highest volume
Right.
times?
Well, I don't want to defend their traffic study, but they follow industry standards, which we expected. So these two slides here, the AM peak hour and the PM peak hour. What you do is you collect traffic volumes between 7 and 9 and 4 to 6, 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 to 6. So these volumes that you see here, the 34 vehicles on Russet Road, that's over 1 hour, the highest hour. You're not going to have 34 every hour. Like I said, the PM peak hour is about 10% of the daily total. So in the PM, you'll have 43 vehicles during that hour. This is the worst case scenario. This is what we do to analyze the intersections to get our letter grades, and specifically to set signal timings during the peak hour to try to keep traffic moving better. So the results that you're seeing in their study and on these slides are that essentially worst case commuting peak period or peak hour. It's 1 hour within those two-hour windows. So if it's 7 to 9, the peak hour could be 7:15 to 8:15, or it's somewhere in that 2-hour window. And of course, if there's 43 between 7 and 8, there's likely going to be 40 or 41 between 8 and 9. We're not just saying it drops off, but that is the absolute apex. And then, it's a bell curve. There's a little less the hour before and a little less the hour after.
So are the traffic signals varied at different times of the day?
Yes, from the 2004 FDR, which I'm not completely familiar with, but the two traffic signals on Independence at South Street and Beverly will have different timings throughout the day. They're coordinated with each other, so if you're traveling, say, from Grove Street to Independence Drive, towards Boston, if you get through the South Street intersection, you'll get through the Beverly Street intersection. Now, how that coordination works will change throughout the day depending on the traffic volume and when you have more cars in one direction or another. So that's, in this case, it's new equipment, so it is done properly. It's not always the case, so when you get to a traffic light and it seems to make no sense, it probably wasn't us doing it wrong, it probably just hasn't been updated and isn't running efficiently. And you don't want to drive in a car with me, because that's all I do when we get to a red light. And my wife's had enough of it at this point.
Thank you.
So this goes to signal synchronization.
Right.
This has been done, but it'll be fine-tuned, I assume, once.
Yes, it's something, I mean, that could be another condition, that you have the proponent monitor the traffic volumes to see if there is a need for traffic signal timing changes if they become occupied. That's one way to, protect the town. This way the town's not the one, and the engineering department isn't the one funding, the study to see what if any traffic timing changes need to be made.
Have they studied all additional locations that you would want them to study?
Yes, there's never been an issue with the study area. Of course, people have asked about the VFW intersection. That's in Boston. The city is aware, or will be made aware of this project. I have no jurisdiction to force them to review it. I also, partially agree with Bob when he says there's not all that much traffic going down there, and there is such a high volume to that intersection that I don't expect the queues to all of a sudden double in length trying to get from Independence to VFW.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Thank you again. What I'd like to ask now is, who's here on behalf of town departments to speak this evening? Thank you, Allison. Please.
Chief of Operations, Rob Ward, Brookline Fire Department. Yes.
Please go ahead.
I was just here to answer questions on if anybody had any.
Questions? Mr. Hussey, you're our...
No questions.
No questions. Okay, so you're satisfied in terms of Hammerhead issues, emergency vehicles?
Well, I think if the fire department's satisfied, I think that covers it. I don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay, thank you. You're off free.
Would you like me to stay for any citizens?
If you would, please. Just by a show of hands, how many people from the public intend to speak this evening? A few, okay. So why don't we work our way, yes, you have a question?
I'd just like to make a comment and answer to one of the questions
One of the questions,
posed to the.
sure.
Good evening. My name's Mark Levin. I'm with Chestnut Hill Realty. Mark Levin, Chestnut Hill Realty. A question was asked about the adequacy of the parking at 1.78. When we evaluated the program, one of the major considerations that we undertook was to avoid at all costs having any spillover into the neighborhood. Secondly, we recognized that the demographic of the new residents are very different than the demographic of the existing Hancock Village residents based on the rent structure, frankly, that they will be more affluent, more likely to have cars. Lastly, I'd just like to point out that zoning calls for over 2 cars per residential unit.
Thank you. So if people from the public who want to speak, if you can line up to that side and then approach the dais and speak. Start by giving us your name.
Hi, Selectman Ken Goldstein. Quick question. I'd like to ask Deputy Ward, is he satisfied with the provisions that have been made for the fire trucks?
I'm sorry I didn't clarify the first time. While that hammerhead may allow our pieces to turn with the ratios, we're still not satisfied. What happens when we respond is it's not gonna be just one truck. If there's a fire up there, there's gonna be at least 5 respond, and that first truck could go to the hammerhead, but then it's not gonna be able to get by the rest. They're gonna be lined up on that street, and we don't believe it's gonna be wide enough. That answers it.
Have there been any issues? There are, I understand, existing projects in Brookline that utilize the Hammerhead technology?
It's the same problem. Once we're in there, it's a long time getting out, and which ties up the trucks. It's a backup issue that we don't like at all.
So there have been incidents at existing,
What happens is, if we can just pull right out, we're back in service. If we have to wait for all those trucks to back up, which we don't like backing up trucks at all, it just takes that much more time. The pieces are tied up there and unable to respond to other incidents.
Well, are you aware of any position by either this department or any other local departments, or whether it's on a state or national level, any organization or any response to, this is obviously an accepted standard by this, by these engineers. Is there anything that a statement by you or by a state agency or something to offer an adjustment?
I think Chief Ford is working on that. He's out of town right now. I looked today, I did not find anything in NFPA or the United States Fire Administration on these turns.
Thank you.
thank you. Are there any follow-ups? Nope, thank you.
Regina Frawley, town meeting member and a resident of F-R-A-W-L-E-Y, first name R-E-G-I-N-A. Town meeting member, precinct 16, Russet Road, residence 46 years. So I'm fairly familiar with the traffic patterns in the area, and there were multiple meetings up in Town Hall over the mini rotary on South Street. As a town meeting member, I can tell you I've had virtually dozens of complaints from people on Bonad Road because they now have significantly higher volume because people avoid the rotary. So I don't know if I don't see any town meeting members from Bonad Road, but I attest to you anecdotally I've had multiple complaints. So with just that mini rotary, there's been more than double the volume on Bonad Road and a lot of complaints and unhappy people. So that's number one I want to put on the record. And just to follow up on Mr. Ward's comments, if you look, you probably still have a copy of the record to mass development by Chief Ford, and he doesn't think it's adequate. And I don't think he's changed his mind since the design hasn't changed on the buffers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is William Barrell. I live at 45 Asheville Road, which is right at the intersection of Asheville and the entrance to Hancock Village. I've been there for about 7 years now. First of all, I'd just like to say that, I agree that the reports did try and stick to industry standards, but as one statistic says that we spend about 38 hours a year in dead traffic, you know that the standards aren't an exact science. The first issue I'd like to talk about is the study area. Both the designer and reviewer felt that the study area was adequate. I have to respectfully disagree. I have to remind them that I am a professional engineer. I'm a civil engineer with over 22 years of experience. And we just spent several minutes talking about how we're going to direct all this traffic onto South Street, but no one's talked about the South Street VFW Parkway interchange, which is in Brookline. It's not that distant, far off land of Boston, and also the Russet Road VFW Parkway. Those are very important intersections to be studied, and the fact that they were left out of the study area is just, I just don't see how they couldn't connect the dots. The South Street VFW is very important for a lot of reasons. One of them is because it has so much traffic, because everyone who lives in that neighborhood, if they're going to Boston, they go out to South Street, then they go to that intersection and they take a left. If they're going to Dedham or Route 1, they go right down Russet, or if they live on Bonad or South Street already, they go towards one of those intersections and they take a right. Those are the two most important turning events in the whole neighborhood. So the fact that they were left off the study area, they're both in Brookline, is very confusing to me. Also, I know as I walk, as I think I explained before, I walk to the train every day. I walk from my house in Asheville Road down to the intersection of South Street and VFW Parkway, and I cross at that light because it's the only safe place to cross. The traffic on VFW Parkway is extremely heavy, and I could not cross it if it wasn't at a signalized intersection. And I can report to you that, you know, not as fast as I used to be, but with that walk signal, it's almost impossible for me to get across in one walk cycle. So kids on bikes or smaller kids or older people, there's no way they can get across there. Also, I can report that I know for a fact there have been several accidents at that intersection. In fact, every time I hit that walk button, I can look down and I can see that there's been broken car parts, glass or whatever. And I know that traffic light has been replaced many times from direct vehicle impact, so I know it's very dangerous. And the reason it's so dangerous is because of the sight distance. Coming up towards Boston, you're coming up Crest Hill, and people try to make that left-hand turn to go down to South Street. There's almost no sight distance. And the VFW Parkway, you know, it's got trees all along the way that make it very beautiful, but once you have those trees lined up at the distance that they're set, you try and look down there, you don't see anything but a row of trees. You can't see the cars coming. Same at the Russet Road intersection. As you try and look down the road to see cars coming, you can't see anything because of the trees. So the fact that those two intersections in Brookline were left off the report, they're within a stone's throw of the development, is kind of puzzling to me. And then I want to talk about, you know, the study area, but the study time. You know, we talk about the area, but, you know, I think people made the point at the last traffic meeting that Beverly Road during winter months becomes one way. And I don't think that was ever studied as part of the thing. That considerably changes the traffic in that area. Now cars can no longer go up and down Beverly Road. They have to go up to the next street, take a left, go around, come down Beverly Road. So the fact that that was never studied is just surprising to me. And then the speed data. I know there was a speed data instrument attached to the tree outside my house. I know it was probably around the February because I was shoveling snow and I noticed it. And then they came back about a month later and they put it up. But as far as I know, there's only been one day in 2007 and one day in 2014 of speed data that was used to compare. And they were within 1 or 2%, and they said that's good. But I know that they've had many more days of recording data, and you know, this could lead to the fact that maybe some of this data was cherry-picked to make it look good. And I don't want to say that's what they've done, but until you see all the data that's been collected, you really won't know. And again, the traffic sampling size is too small. If you're comparing one day in 2007 to one day in 2014, that's not a comparison. That's just random luck that they're so close. And then one thing I want to talk to that, you know, they put a lot of emphasis on was the 85th percentile of speeds. They said the 85th percentile is, you know, right around the speed limit, so that's a good number to use. Well, there was a lot of discussion that during the day, people park on these roads, Russet, Bonad, Asheville, and the residents know there it's basically alternating one-way traffic during the day. And especially in winter when you have snowbanks, it's even worse. Some days you can't even get through. So those cars are crawling through at about 2 miles per hour. At night, around 7 o'clock, everyone knows that you can't have your car on the street in Brookline, so all the cars are in the driveways, off the streets, and cars are flying up and down that road. So you really have two situations. You have 10 miles an hour and less during the day, and probably 50 miles an hour at night. So to just say, oh, the average is 30, let's do our study based on that, it just doesn't make sense. You really have to look at the extremes, because the averages wear out. So when you look at sight distances, you shouldn't be looking at those average 85th percentile speeds. You should be looking at the higher speeds. You look at the 85th percentile when the condition exists that there aren't cars on the road, because that's when you want to know the sight distance is adequate. And then, you know, the other thing that I saw throughout their rebuttal was, you know, this sight distance analysis, these analysis, this construction stuff will be presented at a later date. Well, I'm an engineer. I know you don't have to wait. You can do this analysis now. They have all the data. There's no reason to wait for all these site distances, whatever, to be figured out after the project's been constructed. You know, they've already cut down all the trees. What are they gonna do when they find out there's not adequate site distance? They're gonna have to start cutting down houses, I guess. And then once again, I wanna just point out that, excuse me 1 minute, that in table 6, they talk about, you know, the incidence of accidents, and they talk about the shaded areas that impact where there's pedestrians that are impacted. And those pedestrian impacted are more likely gonna be children trying to cross the street going to that school. So I just want to keep that in mind when we're talking about, you know, these just circles on the screen. More likely than not, this development is being built to bring children into Baker School, and those incidents, when someone looks at this 10 years from now, aren't just gonna be gray-colored circles. They're gonna be children, most likely, because those are the people trying to get across. So I just want to know that, you know, we're putting a face on this, what we're trying to do with all these increases. And then when they talk about traffic calming and they say there's no need for additional traffic calming, you know, I say the last couple nights it's been nice out, sleep with the windows open. Right now, the driveway coming out of Asheville Road is about 8% grade. Cars fly down that road, and I can hear them bottoming out right at the end of my driveway as they come and screech to a halt at the stop sign, which is about 50 yards down from the entrance down there. So to say that traffic calming measures aren't necessary, I think is totally wrong. I don't see why they don't look at speed bumps at the entrance to all the Hancock Village sites, traffic gates. Why not have traffic gates there? That'll force someone to stop. A lot of these communities, gated communities, have them. They'll have a code, they'll put it up, and then you'll be sure that kids can cross the street, cars will come to a complete stop, and it'll be safer. As I said, it's alternating one-way traffic, it's neighborhoods, there's lots of kids. I don't see why they can say, well, it doesn't meet this strict code that was written to try and adhere to a million different scenarios. The other thing is the new trips, comment 9. There's 40 new additional trips. They kind of blow it off and say, that's no big deal. It's only 40 trips. It's only another trip, you know, a minute or so per hour. But if you're increasing the traffic by 60%, but then you're turning around and saying, well, we estimated 1% growth per year, and that was very conservative of us to do that. They're using over 60 years capacity to develop the area with this one project. Does that make sense to allow this company, this organization to come in, use this one project to develop that Asheville Road neighborhood for the next 100 years? Because really we saw that the actual growth was around 0.5%. So 0.5%, they're increasing it by 60%. That's 120 years of development they're using in this one project. To me, those numbers don't add up. The comment number 11, they talk about equal dispersion. Yeah, they're putting several driveways in, but 70 to 75% of the traffic is going to be going up Asheville Road, where I live and my neighbors live, going to the high-rise. So to say that, yeah, we have 3 or 4 different locations so we can equally disperse it, it doesn't make sense. 70% of the traffic is going up to the high-rise, and that's what should be studied. And then the sidewalks. You know, what they say is they're adding additional new sidewalks, but they're also destroying probably hundreds of feet of sidewalk. I know this sidewalk right now from VFW Parkway all the way up to Baker School. That whole amount is going to be eliminated and put in with parking and houses. So when they say they're adding, what's the net gain? Is it a net gain? Is it a net loss? Should be easy to figure out, right? And then they say they're going to connect the Asheville Road sidewalk to all the other sidewalks within this new development, make it all access friendly. But the current plans that I've seen, there's a 10% grade going up to that high rise. From Asheville Road up 10%, and they say they're going to make all these walkways ADA compliant. There's no way someone in a wheelchair is going to push themselves from my house up to the high rise up a 10% grade. They would need multiple switchbacks, level areas, everything. So it seems like they just make these comments saying that we will comply, we will do this, but they don't actually have the plans to back it up saying we do comply. So I think before any decisions are made, the proof has to be in the pudding. The plan has to be there complete and fully analyzed to make sure it works. One of the things that it really bothers me about the existing development, and what really bothers me with the new development, is satellite parking. You know, they say they're going to add all these spaces, 1.78, but they kind of gloss over the fact that a lot of these parking spaces are going to be satellite spaces. Now everyone knows when you come home with a load of groceries, you're not going to park 200 yards away from your house and grab 80 grocery bags and carry them all the way to your house. You're going to double park somewhere, and that's what they do all the time. And I have a picture on my phone. I went out and said, you know, I should really take a photo of this. I'll see if I could do it. As soon as I went out, There's someone on the 8% grade, a 20-foot wide, with their hazards on, unloading their car, making several trips, just to get all their groceries into the house. Now when all these people have to park far from their house, transport all these things, portage, all this stuff, they're gonna be double parking. That's gonna affect the fire department if the fire breaks out and the fireman has to get down there in time. Other cars, 10% grades and curves with double parking, it's a recipe for disaster. So I really think the satellite parking needs to be investigated a little more. And then one of the data I looked at that wasn't really talked about tonight was the trip generation. I think the trip generation estimated was 1.7 trips per day. Now, if people are gonna go to work and come back, that's 2 trips. That means if they leave Hancock Village again, they can't come back, you know, a third of the time. So how many people leave, because this is the only entrance, so how many people leave Hancock Village and don't come back? I mean, at the very least, the trip generation should be probably in even numbers. Then I just want to talk about the Independence Drive plans. You know, they talk about cross sections where they're going to pull areas in, add these bike lanes, traffic calming, turn it into Route 16. First of all, my dentist is on Route 16, and if I had to go to the dentist more than twice a year, I get a new dentist, because Route 16 is a mess. It's a total traffic nightmare. Secondly, why put a bike lane in if it doesn't go anywhere? You're going to put a bike lane from just past the traffic signal at the Baker Beverly Road down to where? Down to CVS or something with about 15 bump outs, 3 crossings, 5 hawk systems. I mean, what does that do anyone? What's the purpose of that? So you're basically taking away capacity from Independence Drive just to provide this system that really, you know, bike lanes have to be part of a global scheme, an overall thing. If you look what they've done in Boston with their bike lanes, they don't put them in 300 yards in here and 300 yards over there. They're contiguous and everything. If we want to bring hubway bicycles to Brookline, you know, we should be thinking of a comprehensive system and not these little segments that really don't join up to anything. And then they talk about the construction management plan that, yeah, this is just something that we'll deal with. Like every project, we deal with it in the future, and, you know, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. They're going to be taking away thousands of yards of this rock material that they're blasting out of there. That is a lot of trucks. It's going to destroy the streets. They should be doing pavement analysis. You know, a lot of people look at pavement, they don't realize you actually design the pavement to handle the loads. I haven't seen, that's something we do for every job that I work with in my job. I haven't seen any pavement analysis, any pavement design. Can the road handle it? Are they going to replace the roads in all those neighborhoods after the project's over? I mean, these are things that can be addressed right now. I mean, the project I'm working on right now is the Fore River Bridge in Quincy. It's on Route 3A, a major route, but that was a major part of the preliminary design was traffic, because we're bringing in millions of pounds of steel, millions of truckloads, hundreds of truckloads are going to be in there, and the towns were very involved before the project was delivered to make sure there was routes in place to make sure that it could be handled. So this is not something you put on the back burner and want to discuss at some later date. And then they talk about they're changing, I guess, the plans once again to the high-rise, and I guess the plan is to keep changing the plans until all the traffic meetings are over, and then they just change it to the one they want. I mean, how can we have a traffic meeting if the plans don't even show where the road is going to be at this point? It doesn't make sense that they're trying to make this decision, this is the final meeting, and they can't make a 300-yard road from my driveway to the hotel on the hill. And then one of the things that bothers me the most is the pedestrian crossing to the playground across the VFW Parkway. Again, how this was left out of the study areas just blows my mind. I mean, they're taking all the green space of this project and they're building on it. This is a place that every single day, on days like today when it's nice out, is full of children playing baseball, soccer, running around, having fun. There'll be no place for them to work to do this anymore once this project is built. They have no choice but to go across the Heinz Field in Boston, across the street, across 4 lanes of VFW Parkway, and I see it every day. Mothers grabbing their children because South Street is too far away, and the other crosswalk way down by CVS is too far away. If you've got a 2-year-old, by the time you walked across these crosswalks, you'd want to go home, you'd be worn out. So the mothers grab their children, they look, they see the cars, and they book it across. And this is only going to get worse, and I guarantee if this project gets through without addressing this, there's going to be serious accidents there. I mean, this is a major destination point, and the pedestrians have been, in my opinion, totally overlooked in this whole project. And then, you know, again, the emergency vehicles. I think the point is being missed about whether the emergency vehicles can navigate within inside the newly proposed development, but can they even get to it? I mean, there's been talk about how the city of Boston is going to respond to some of these emergencies because they're closer than Brookline. But last night, in the middle of the night, fire department was outside my house. I'm not sure why, but there was, like he said, at least 5 units and police cars responded. They were all outside the house. You know, luckily it was nighttime because during the day they could not get down Asheville or Bonad or whatever. But these responded, and it took them a while without any cars just to get the vehicles out of there. So when there's all these cars in here and all these new people, are we putting all these people that are just coming to get the education at Baker School or whatever at risk because the streets and the service area just cannot handle these emergency vehicles? And it only takes one, you know, new fire person going down the wrong road, and someone's car that's just because of the trees and the congestion is a little too close to the car on the other side of the street, and the truck's stuck, and there's 5 more trucks stuck behind them. There's nowhere to back up, and you know, everyone's stuck in the neighborhood while this new development is burning or whatever. So I think that's one of the key issues that really has to be addressed, and not necessarily in addition to the ability to maneuver within inside the site. So I just think that's another thing that has to be studied, and I guess that ends my comments. I'll let other people go, but I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Stephen Krug. I live at 237 KRUG. Live at 237 Russet, right at the corner of VFW and Russet. And so 2 of the 3 things I want to say will be very similar, but hopefully they'll be different enough, and I'll try and keep them quick. One is the idea of a 4-way stop at Asheville. I travel several times a day from my corner of Russet out to Independence on Russet, and I treat that intersection as a 4-way stop. I come to very close to a stop at that intersection because so many times in the years I've lived there, probably about 4 or 5 times a year, I have watched people blow through that stop sign. Not come to a rolling stop, look around, and proceed, but blow through that stop sign. I don't know whether it's because of the grade or because there are other intersections nearby that are 4-way stops, so they assume it's a 4-way stop. I don't know what the reason is, but I do know that I'm very happy that there aren't traffic, that there are not an incidence of accidents at that intersection, but it's not because people don't run through that intersection. So I would be perfectly fine with that being a 4-way stop if in fact it would, you know, keep anybody from getting killed there. They're supposedly going to change the grade, but whatever. So the other thing about Russet Road has come up, you asked a question about it, and he mentioned it, is that it's a very narrow street. So when I go from my corner down to Independence, I would say at least, I've been trying to actually think about it for the last month and keep an eye on it, at least every other day I end up stopping as though I was on a beach road at Martha's Vineyard and blinking my lights at somebody to decide which one of us is going to go through first, that we have to signal right of way to each other. And it's not just when there are cars parked on both sides. It's a very narrow street. It's lined with those wonderful trees, and it's narrow enough that if somebody has an SUV parked on one side of it, not even out from the curb, there is not room for 2 cars to pass there. So I just wonder what's going to happen when you know, a whole line of traffic coming out of Asheville is heading for Independence, and somebody's coming the other way. You know, what will happen, I think, is that they'll go someplace else, that the traffic, I think it's completely unclear what the traffic pattern is that would emerge from this. And I think it's going to depend on those kinds of variations. But I think it's irresponsible to say we can average out this traffic overall over this whole network of streets, you know, in the area. I don't think that's how it's going to work. I don't know where it will end up. And the last thing I want to say was this idea of Independence, making Independence 2 lanes. That's fine. Independence in many ways is 2 lanes because there are often cars parked along large portions of Independence. But I wonder what would happen if it's 2-way and you then have traffic coming home in the evening rush hour, coming down from Putterham Circle, and attempting to make a left turn into either this new quarter mile long driveway or the existing driveway to make a left turn to get back into Hancock Village. If it's 2 lanes, then they're going to be holding up traffic until they can make their turn. And I doubt if many of them would do it right past the Russet Road Beverly intersection, because that driveway is only going to be, what, 100 feet or a couple 100 feet from that intersection. So if people were stopping there to make a left turn, then traffic is obviously going to back up through that traffic light. So it just seems to me there hasn't been sort of an attempt to say, well, what's actually going to happen with all this traffic? You know, what's the net effect of this going to be? So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Steve Chiumenti, Chiumenti. I live at 262 Russet Road. I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 16. And I was going to comment really specifically on the letters themselves, the comments and the responses. And one thing I noticed that if you read Beta's report, they number their comments, and if you look at MDM's responses, they number their comments differently. They kind of don't flow exactly. So I think they've all been using MDM's numbers. So my first comment really is comment 2 on the MDM report, which was comment 1 on Beta and so on, but I'll just refer to MDM. Comment 2 was Beta had noted that the ATR should collect traffic volume data to determine whether or not traffic volumes in the study area have increased since 2007. Daily traffic volume should also be collected along Russet Road and Asheville Road in order to compare traffic volumes previously collected by the town. Our comment is that the ATR data presented compares a single day in September 2007 to a single day in April 2014. We would like to know if there were more days recorded during each period, and I think the suggestion was there were, and if there was data selection. We'd also like to know what the expected day-to-day variation in traffic volume is and whether comparison of a single day is a valid methodology. Okay, all right. I try not to waste everybody's time, but I can give you the text after. There are many conclusory statements in the report based on extremely limited data. The request from Beta's review was for ATR data from Russet in Asheville, but no such data are presented. Therefore, the MDM report is non-responsive to Beta's original comment. And MDM's cites additional traffic data from 2004 and 2013, but the specific dates in the studies are not presented. Were they weekdays, school days? How many days were actually studied? Now, comment number 8 in MDM's response. Beta had noted that since most of the proposed units will access the site via Asheville Road, the majority of traffic related to the proposed project will travel on the residential streets of Asheville Road, Russet Road, and South Street. Asheville Road is approximately 35 feet wide, while Russet Road and South Street are both approximately 25 feet wide, with on-street parking on both sides. Since the on-street parking limits are available travel with, traffic calming measures should be considered for the roadways. MDM's response states that the purpose of traffic calming is to achieve slower speeds, reducing collision frequency and severity, and increasing safety for non-motorized users. They claim that additional traffic calming measures are already in place and additional measures are not warranted for these streets. In essence, MDM presents the odd argument that adding substantial additional traffic is fine because the streets are so small that people can't go fast anyway. Both Beta and MDM miss the point that the issue is that the streets are too small to accommodate substantial additional traffic. On Russet, current volume by MDM reporting is 65 and 50 by peak hour AM and PM, and the expected new peak hour trips are 34 and 43 AM to PM, a 60% increase. In the morning, the increase will be to 99 cars per hour, which for a small, essentially one-lane, two-way road is very substantial. The traffic consultants do not address the narrow width of the road, essentially single lane, and how this factors into the increased traffic volume. The need is not traffic calming, but rather traffic reduction. Then the discussion about sightlines and stuff, and I think that I wanted to mention about the nature of the busyness on these roads, Russet and Bonad. It's not cars stopping at at stop signs and so on so much as the fact that this is a neighborhood full of children, given the nature of this neighborhood, Baker School and so on. They're outside playing. They're on scooters. They're on bikes. They often intrude upon the roadway. There must be 3 basketball baskets there that kids are playing basketball on a nice day. Kids do unpredictable things. That's really, I think, ultimately the real concern here, in addition to just the fact that there's just too many cars going back and forth and it's hard to negotiate the street. The real problem is the surprise of children who are quite used to Even little children playing on scooters sometimes go down a driveway, ramp, or something into the street. Comment 9, the trip distribution method is appropriate for this project, although some discrepancies in the travel patterns through residential streets from Asheville Street through the study area may exist. What discrepancies that are alluded to? How might these affect traffic projections? The MDM response indicates that the increase will range from fewer than 10 to just over 40 per hour, an increase that will not materially impact neighborhood traffic flow. The impact on Russet is greatest and is between 30 to 40 cars per hour peak. Again, the narrow width of Russet needs to be factored into the impact. On comment 10, as MDM numbered them, Beta stated that the proponent should commit to expanded or additional TDM measures. Additional zip cars on site should be investigated. Bike storage locations should be provided throughout the site. In addition, the town should require a signed TDM agreement as part of the permitting process in order to ensure that TDM measures continue to exist into the future. MDM's response is that Chestnut Hill Realty has a TDM for existing property and plans to expand it for the proposed development. They will contact Zipcar about additional cars. First, there's an awful lot of talk about Zipcar. There are only 2 of them. Second, the response indicates no firm commitment to any specific TDM. How much more bike storage? How many more shuttle van trips? What schedule? How will this be maintained and enforced? And third, how does any of this mitigate the effect of adding 140 parking spaces to the existing 167 that now empty onto Russet Road from the Asheville Road connection? That's an 84% increase in vehicles, which will necessarily result in an 84% increase in traffic and exiting through Asheville Road onto Russet. What basis is there for any guess that the new residents in the new 192 apartments in the tower, for example, will use their vehicles any differently than existing residents who enter and exit onto Asheville Road? People do not buy and maintain automobiles to decorate parking lots. Russet Road is at capacity now with vehicles and pedestrians, including children walking to and from Baker School or to the bus stop to get to the high school. Comment 15. At a minimum, a new pavement, the comment 15 on MDM's response. At a minimum, a new pavement striping plan should be investigated along Independence Drive to provide separate travel lanes and shoulders. A complete streets design, which would include bicycle facilities and separate parking lanes, should be investigated for the new cross section. This may include reducing Independence Drive to 1 lane of travel in both directions to accommodate a bicycle lane and parking lane. Analysis should be conducted to determine the feasibility of the implementation of complete streets design concept. Beta is suggesting making Independence Drive a single lane in both directions, requiring much additional analysis to determine the impact on traffic. Adjoining roads are, for the most part, 2 lanes, so reducing the capacity of Independence would predictably create a traffic bottleneck. The consultant offered Route 16 in Wellesley as a shining example, but those familiar with this road know it's a dismal headache. What is motivating this suggestion to make it single lane? Does it have to do with increased volume of pedestrians and traffic from the proposed development? The need to make these changes that will make the traffic worse indicates that the problem is that the infrastructure does not safely support this expansion, and the proposed change will not be an improvement. Comment 25. Currently, the roadway width along Asheville Road at the site is very narrow, which is only 18 feet. The proponent did recommend that it be widened to 22 feet. However, 24 feet is recommended. MDM responded that it will be 22 feet and that's all it's needed. What is the reasoning behind the recommendation for 24 feet? What is the downside to keeping it 22 feet or widening it to 24 feet? It's not clear to us. Comment 31 referred to construction traffic. MDM responded that there will be construction management plan that addresses truck traffic. There will be removal of many truckloads of stone blasted from the site. Much of this will go down Russet Road, which, as mentioned, is very narrow. The trucks will likely damage the road. The promise of a vague construction plan is not enough. How many truck trips are expected over what period of time, and how will their impact be mitigated? And further, regarding truck traffic on Russet Road, we want to put on the record the fact that Russet Road has a commercial truck exclusion. No commercial vehicle shall be operated at any time on Russet Road in the traffic rules. There had been a sign there for years, and it unaccountably disappeared some time ago. It's been since replaced since we brought this to the attention of the traffic department. The exclusion still exists, and the traffic department recently installed a new sign. How does this impact CHR's operating commercial vehicles on Russet Road? It certainly hasn't had any impact on them up until now. They routinely run their service vehicles up and down Russet Road. Intersection quality. Regarding the traffic analysis, the MDM report commented upon intersection quality in the neighborhood. Most of the intersections were rated as C, while one was rated D. Why is it rated D? In some towns, is it not required that the minimum standard intersections affected by construction be C? We really should not be aiming for C or D, but better. There will be left turns across Independence for cars coming down on the Beverly side. They'll have to go on to Independence, and to go up to Putterham, they have to turn left, which means across a lane of traffic on Independence. That will be dangerous. It would seem, and this is the final remark, it would seem on the basis of MDM's non-responsive responses regarding traffic that the town is expected to permit the degradation of traffic and pedestrian safety until we can achieve a higher average number of collisions and injuries on neighborhood roadways. On behalf of the neighborhood, thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
My name is Jay Tallerman. I represent a number of the area residents. I've spoken once before. I serve as town or special counsel to several dozen towns and have represented hundreds of towns on planning and zoning matters. And I can tell you, and I'm speaking only tonight about the cul-de-sac and hammerhead issue, that nearly every single town that I've ever encountered and ever worked with on zoning and planning prohibits lengthy cul-de-sacs and hammerheads. And they do it not out of an issue, they don't regulate it because there might be sufficient turning radius. That's a design element. They limit it, design it, or regulate it, prohibit it for the reasons that the fire department has already stated. That there are concerns about appreciable delay or inability to get to a fire due to single access, narrowness, blockage, and otherwise. The issue that you have to take into consideration here isn't whether or not in a pure design element, a single fire vehicle, the largest vehicle, can get there and navigate around a circle. It's whether or not at night, in winter, in darkness, when everyone's parked up on both sides of the road in every parking space, and the road is narrower or there may be blockage, can the fire department get its ladder truck and its pumper truck and its other truck, it normally takes 3 trucks, to the site in a safe and effective way where they can quickly, without delay, fight a fire in the last house down on the left? And invariably, the answer from professional planners and professional firefighters is, we're concerned about that. Will a fire department always try and get there? Yeah, they will. Will they do a great job? Yeah, they will. But when you're talking about a fire and a lot of smoke and any appreciable delay, either at that site or at another site where they can't back out and get there, it could mean harm, death, property damage, or otherwise. And that's the reason why we regulate these things. So you can look to nearly every single other town and a universal opinion, to my knowledge, of almost every planner that suggests that lengthy cul-de-sacs not be permitted. Now, they cite a few examples where there are some cul-de-sacs. I can attest to you that there are hundreds of examples where towns prohibit it and deny cul-de-sacs, including area towns. Now, I don't know what happens here in Brookline. I think some of the examples are inapplicable, but you've heard the chief himself or the fire department himself say that they're concerned about some of the existing ones that were approved. As another form of regulation, I think you have to look to Housing Appeals Committee decisions themselves. I mean, we know that the Housing Appeals Committee isn't particularly kind to cities and towns when it comes to these. But in recent years, 2 of the cases that have sided with towns, practically the only 2 cases that have sided with towns on a design element, are issues regarding single access subdivisions. That's the OIB versus Braintree case and the Lexington Woods versus Waltham case, where the Housing Appeals Committee expressly and emphatically upheld denials of comprehensive permits due to concerns with single access roadways. And their concerns are exactly the concerns that I've raised here and that the chief has already raised, that there could be blockage and delay for emergency vehicles that could result in harm or death in those situations. And those cases provide ample precedent for you to look at. Now, whether or not at the end of the analysis you agree that these facts meet those facts is a question for you to all decide. What I'm suggesting to you here tonight is there's a robust body of law, regulation, and HAC precedent to consider that and keep that on the front burner. At the end of the day, what you really have to look at is what the chief thinks. He's the one that's got to fight the fire. If he doesn't have a level of confidence that he can safely navigate the roadway system in a way that where he can safely fight a fire with his 3 required vehicles, you should take that very seriously, and I hope you do going forward. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Irene Scharf. I'm an abutter on Russet Road, and I'm also a town meeting member, Precinct 16. Just have 2 comments to make. From the MDM slideshow, it was slide number 12, wherein the person was discussing the possible expansion of current services such as shuttles, bicycles, using more sidewalks and zip cars. I just want to point out to the board that the slide said Chestnut Hill Realty may expand current services, shuttle, bike, sidewalk, zip car. During the testimony, the person testifying said would. I think it's really, we all sit here patiently month after month. We're getting to the end of this process. It's May. It's concerning to me and many of my neighbors that we have all of these, we may do this, we may do that, we may make a deal, we may make a compromise, we may not do it. We really need, this late in the game, given the tone that I'm hearing from, that I'm inferring from the questions from you all and lack of questions, we need some commitments. We don't need this to be a loosey-goosey thing where approval is given and then in the course of things there's all these questions that were not mandated to be answered. So that is really one concern. Secondly, a note I'm expressing from a neighbor. There is suspicion that the traffic study was not necessarily that legitimate, that maybe it was done during April vacation, that 43 extra trips cannot be accurate, or 43 trips a day cannot be accurate, that would just encompass the people who already live on the street. And so just want, basically the point is, I guess, that it is unclear to people that the data that you're getting are not being cherry-picked for the specific narrowly tailored question that people are being asked to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joni Burstein. I live on South Street. Just 3 quick things. One is the talk about cars turning onto VFW Parkway from South Street or Russet Road or Bonnet. The visibility is cut down significantly also when there are snowbanks. And that's a good and significant portion of the year. And that's part of the traffic study that wasn't mentioned by them, but only by neighbors. So I think that that needs to be taken into consideration. Another aspect is on Independence. To me, whenever I've driven there, the cars that park there are parking there because they belong to Hancock Village. So if they're changing the parking inside to make parking for the people living there, it seems to me to invite the possibility of making the road there wider and accommodating more cars, not fewer, to facilitate the flow of traffic. So instead of narrowing it to 1 lane, keeping it at a point or even expanding it so that you can have 2 lanes in each direction and cut down on the bottleneck that Hancock Village expansion would create. And my phone shut off, so I don't remember my 3rd point, but those are the 2. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin Kucher, K-O-O-C-H-E-R. I live on Beverly Road, and I've lived there for 37 years. Just a couple of comments, in terms of traffic on Independence Drive. What I heard in terms of the traffic study was that they were talking about the peak hour in the evening from 4 to 6. I drive down Independence from Beverly to VFW quite frequently, and I can tell you that rush hour does not begin at 4. It begins around 3:15, 3:30, and that's when the backup begins. and it can be quite substantial. So again, in terms of their exact 2-hour window, I would suggest that that's not written in stone. The second thing, and it was mentioned briefly, but there hasn't really been a lot of comments regarding the new driveways, which would run parallel from Beverly and Russet. As was mentioned, those people who want to take a left turn from the Russet side or Beverly Road side are going to be turning against traffic. They're also going to be turning, depending on which side you're talking about, 400 feet or 200 and approximately 230 feet from the traffic signal at the intersection of Independence, Beverly, and Russet. Now, I can't believe that any traffic expert would say that that would be a safe thing to do. And add to it, as the former speaker mentioned, doing that during high volume times, or even on the weekends. I mean, I would like to say that I drive down Russet Road frequently to visit friends, to get to VFW a different way, and I can tell you that on the weekends, there's traffic, and the traffic coming down from Asheville, from the current Hancock Village property, these people are flying. And I noticed this on Saturday, on a Sunday. Others have mentioned that it's during the week. So again, this is an observation by a citizen, but it's real. And, you know, the four-way stop might be interesting to do, but I'm not convinced that that would stop. And it does have to do with the gradation, the 8%, et cetera. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that there's been no discussion in terms of what happens with snow narrowing Beverly and Russet Road further. I can tell you that this past winter, as we all know, was a pretty miserable winter. There was a lot of snow, and Beverly Road becomes one way from before the first flake falls until April 15th. And it becomes one way from like LaGrange down Beverly to that light intersection of Russet, Beverly, and Independence. And several years ago when we had ice storms, parents were having great difficulty parking to pick up their children, you know, despite the fact that salt and sand had been put on the walkways. So I would just say to you, in terms of emergency vehicles, again, I think that presents a problem, which I don't think has been addressed to the satisfaction of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to speak at this time? Seeing nobody, I want to call on the representative from Beta, see if he can respond to some of the questions that have been asked tonight. I saw you taking notes.
You're supposed to call on MDM right now. But
Does MDM want to go
no,
first?
No, I'm just kidding. I can take the heat. I wrote down a bunch trying to keep up. I'll try to remember my notes. I'm going to go in reverse order because I remember those clearer right now. I'll figure out the rest. The first one is, the last comment I had is that the MDM response does not fully commit to TDM measures, and I completely agree. In my letter from today, which I'm sure the public hasn't seen, on the last page in the conclusions and recommendations, I say an official commitment to the TDM measures should be enacted, and then in parentheses, expanding the shuttle service, providing on-site bike storage, and expanding Zipcar supply if demand is needed. And then I didn't close the parenthesis. The town should require a signed TDM agreement as part of this permitting process. So I completely agree on that. There does need to be more of a commitment. You know, how that becomes official is usually in the approval process. So that's something that I recommend the board follow. Along those lines, as well as the construction management, the board should also include a commitment, or not a commitment, but they should, you should have the proponent provide you with a construction management plan. That would include the number of trucks that will haul gravel off the site, or not the gravel, but the blasted ledge, and just trucks in general. Of course, that number can't be determined right now because the site plan is still being discussed. We had a question about the grading of the site, and people think 10% is too extreme. That is a comment that is in our site plan letter, and it's still ongoing. We had, basically, Beta was hired for traffic review and for site and stormwater evaluation. So our civil/stormwater management review letter is dated April 2nd, and in there it discusses the fact that we don't like the 10% grade, and there's also a side slope. So that is something that the civil engineers in my office are working on with Stantec, who's the site engineer. So that is still ongoing, and that we need more information for that. I can't speak as an expert to it, other than 10% grade is steep, but it is allowed. So there is, you know, there's things that can be done to flatten it, though. Another comment was made about the end of Asheville Road. Currently, it's less, as you exit the site, it's less than, the width is less than the rest of Asheville Road. And I believe, I'm hearing that at the last meeting, it was said that 24 is standard. Where that come from is that for years, traffic engineers have said a 12-foot lane is the standard width of a travel lane. That is based on highway. If you're on a highway doing 55, you want 12 feet widths per lane, so you get 12 plus 12 is 24 for two-way traffic. We're now finding that urban design and local roadway design, more specific in this case, doesn't need such wide roadways, and in fact increases speeds because of the extra width. So I would recommend 22 feet, if not 21 feet, 20 feet. There is no reason to go to 24 feet in this case. It does nothing but increase speed or encourage increased speeding, and as they're coming down the hill, obviously, that's the last thing we need to do. Someone said we should be talking about traffic calming is trying to, we shouldn't be talking about traffic calming, we should be talking about traffic reduction. And the point of traffic calming is to reduce traffic volume on streets. The issue here is because of the web of streets is how, you know, where do we want to push them, as we discussed before. It's not as simple as put traffic calming here and that solves all the problems in the world. We need to look at the whole area and go from there. Trip distribution discrepancy. Bob, if you want to pull up the graphics there. I made a comment in my first letter that said there are some discrepancies. Basically, when a car leaves the site in the morning, right there, let me take the phone off. When a car leaves Asheville Road and leaves the site in the morning, they have, this is the PM, back. They have 18 vehicles making a right there, which of course gets into VFW. They would have to make a right onto BFW. Well, that sends them outbound. So my discrepancy is that 18 should actually be a through. And then you see here, there's only 3 vehicles making a right. Well, that's saying that only 3 people are leaving here and then heading inbound on BFW. So my argument is that the 18 and the 3 should be switched. It doesn't make a material difference, which is why I did not discuss it more in detail in the letter. It would have been wordy and difficult to explain without the graphic. It's not going to change the findings of the study. Along those lines, the sight distance here at the signalized intersection of South Street is limited, but there is a traffic signal there, so sight distance is not an issue. As for Bonnet Road and Russet Road, they're right turn only, and they're also limited sight distance. There's no way to correct that other than closing those 2 roads, and I don't think that's what the neighborhood's looking for. The Beverly Road, it was mentioned that it's one way during school season. The traffic counts were done during that period. That is the situation that exists for more than half the year. I'd rather that situation be analyzed than the situation of during the summer when it's 2 ways. This is the prominent situation, is that it's one way out of here during school hours, and that is how it was done. It was quickly mentioned that the counts were done during school vacation week, and I can't remember exactly what, it was April, so it would have been the Easter break or the spring break. It was done on the Wednesday before school vacation. So I wouldn't be thrilled with Thursday traffic from that day because maybe people leave early. But the week before school vacation, especially Tuesday or Wednesday, is acceptable data, and it wasn't during the actual vacation week. We would never accept traffic volumes from Friday or Monday unless, there's specific situations, not for a residential development. It was discussed about the 85th percentile speed, and as as the neighbors were giving their comments, I actually looked through the appendix again to make sure I didn't miss anything. And the 85th percentile speed does not fluctuate throughout the day. So it might give the impression that people are driving very slow, but the radar detection that was out there does not show a spike in travel speeds after the parking is banned on the street at night. Let's see, I kind of jumped around here. The satellite parking is an existing issue, and it is an issue. People can't park right next to their building in a lot of cases. The future buildings actually don't have that problem. That's something that I looked at very closely, because sometimes on a site like this, people will just put parking where they can and not near the buildings. In this case, there's actually more than 2 spaces per unit along here, and along here. The one place where it is a little less than the 1.4 or 1.5 that I like to see is in the garage of the main unit. So those people will have to either walk to the parking here or the parking over here. They do, however, for groceries, have a drop-off aisle over here. So the double parking, as far as I can see it at this point, is not an issue. And it actually, this parking is designed better than the existing parking. Route 16 in Wellesley, again, this must have come up at the last hearing. It is a terrible example in this case. It's a nightmare. The similarity is that we put in the flashing pedestrian beacon on the side of the road. The volume on Route 16 on one lane is extremely higher than the volume on Independence Drive. They're not even comparable. The only similarity is this is the bike lane, I'm sorry. The only similarity is that we have a similar pedestrian activation sign like that was put in as part of mitigation for the redevelopment of the Grossman site. So as you're coming through Lower Falls, where the CVS is now and the independent living's in the back, there's a mid-block pedestrian crossing that has these pedestrian activated signals. But other than that, the traffic volume is much worse. And because I worked on that study, the other issue with 16, and especially in the morning as you're leaving Wellesley getting to 128, is that the Concord Avenue intersection is actually in Newton, and that light, as I said before, is old. It has no actuation. It's pre-timed. It's terrible. That mitigation actually, the developer had to give money to the city of Newton for them to upgrade that signal, and I don't think that's happened yet. So a lot of the issues with that corridor is because of that signal, and it's one of the ones that drives me nuts. The trip gen rates, it was discussed that it's 1.7 per unit, and how do they get home? The 1.7 is what falls within the peak hour. The neighbor that used that example said he walked to the T to commute to work, so he doesn't have any trip. Or he could go to work early and he wouldn't be in during the peak hour, or he would return during the peak hour. So the 1.7 is just what occurs during the peak hours, and I'm not exactly sure of the number off the top of my head. Throughout the course of the day, a unit will generate on average 10 vehicle trips. So that means 5 trips. One unit will generate 5 trips out and 5 trips in. So that's, people leaving to go to work, going shopping, school. So the average is pretty high. In this case, I wouldn't expect that, since there is actually the extra transportation options. So I wouldn't expect a 10, but they did use that because that is the standard. There was someone said that the data for the speed data and the volume data for the local roads, Russet Road, Asheville Road, and Bonai Road, weren't provided in the response. They're not in the letter of the response, but they're in the appendix. It's very tedious to go through it, but they are in there. And then they are summarized, and the volumes are summarized in one of the slides. But they are in there. The course of the day, it would be great if we had ongoing traffic monitoring, but we don't. We typically use one day. The adjustments, September and April, are both actually higher than average. School's in session, it's nice weather. So comparing September and April volumes from different years is comparable. If they would have done, say, September in 2007 and compared it to February of 2014, then yes, that would have shown, the growth that could have potentially happened would have been hidden by the fact that the seasonality reduces the volumes. But comparing September and April is legitimate. I think that's all the ones I wrote down.
Question was asked whether there should have been a review at the South Street VFW interchange.
Right, so that, I discussed, there's a signal there at that intersection. Oh, I passed it already. No, I didn't. The site, as I was just saying, they're sending, according to this graphic, they're only sending 3. I suggest it's 18. In either case, the operations at this signal are not gonna change because of 18 vehicles or 3 vehicles. There's, the volume on VFW is what drives the operations of that signal, basically regardless of what's coming down South Street. And adding 18 vehicles or 3 vehicles isn't gonna all of a sudden create this massive long queue on South Street to access VFW. So that's why we didn't request that it be included in the study area.
You have the same response on the Russet Road VFW?
Yeah, the problem with Russet Road is that it's right in and right out only. So the analysis is gonna tell you that it operates wonderfully. And there's not much conflict there. And there's no way to fix that intersection with the site distance issues that exist, like I said, other than closing it. So in some cases, intersections were left out of the study area because we knew what the results of studying would have been. So we didn't request it.
Do you have a comment on narrowness on Russet Road?
Yeah, like I said before, it goes both ways. The on-street parking and the narrowness reduces speeds. It reduces the appealness of the street. If you remove parking on one side, you're really only encouraging more vehicles, more speed. If there really is an issue with 2 cars parked on the street and emergency vehicles not being able to get through, that's an existing issue, and that's something I think the town should rectify with or without this project. But short of that, I wouldn't recommend opening the road up essentially to more people and more speed.
Do you have a comment on, it's been suggested that the lengthy cul-de-sacs and the hammerheads, it's been suggested both by the fire department, but also by Mr. Tallerman, that these are not acceptable methods in most towns. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Tallerman?
Yes. I don't have experience where a project was shot down specifically for that. I actually was the traffic engineer for the OIB in Braintree. We didn't do the site design. I wasn't at Beta at the time. We had a traffic hearing such as this, and then afterwards, the site plan design, which eventually killed the project, I wasn't involved in, and I didn't know until tonight that that's what killed the project. I just knew that it died. It's not, it seems like it's a transportation issue. It's not a traffic issue. It's really more of a site plan issue. I would work with our civil engineers, but as far as I'm aware, they're not desirable by the fire department, but I don't have a transportation standard that says you can't do it, as the AASHTO graphic showed, which, a lot of times these standards aren't what the public are looking for, but unfortunately, it's what I have to rely on. Someone made the comment of the intersection's a level of service C, and we should be asking for better. Well, if you're asking for level of service B, why aren't you asking for level of service A? I have the standard of anything that's level of service D or better is acceptable. It might not be acceptable to the residents. I'm not trying to change their mind, but those are the standards that I have to follow.
One last question, and you may have answered this already, but I just need to ask. The suggestion has been made a couple of times that the data was cherry-picked.
No, I mean, like I said, all of the data that they collected is in the back. They present averages in some cases, 85th percentile in some cases. Some of the summaries might be done to make it look rosy for them, but all of the data is there. I did go through all of the data. They didn't, pick an arbitrary number that was an anomaly that everything looked great for this one day or this 1 hour. It is, pretty consistent through the area since it is local roadways for the most part. People tend to do the same thing, throughout most of the day or throughout each day. So I didn't see any evidence of cherry picking. They might not have highlighted the worst parts, but they are in there in the appendix, and I know what to look for. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I have just one. In terms of it's actually a follow-up to a question that I asked earlier. in terms of directing the traffic off of Russet or Bonad, do you have any thoughts of during peak travel times prohibiting left-hand turns off of Asheville, so in that way it'll force people to South Street?
Right. Usually left turn restrictions are not favorable, because what you end up doing, I'll use the driveway as a better example, and then I'll answer your question more specifically. If you use the west driveway here, or it's not shown, it's where the grass area is in this picture. If you restrict left turns out of that driveway, someone's just gonna make a right out of there, and then they're either gonna U-turn, or they're gonna come through here and then make a left here. So you're not ever really gonna change the movement in a situation like that. In this case, if, say, you didn't allow left turns here, you would force people through. It would work as much as it got enforced, to be honest with you. People don't look at signs. They don't follow signs. They look at them and ignore them, unless they're worried that ignoring them is gonna, lead to a ticket. So that's really up to you and the town. If that's the way you want to go, is one way that you'd be able to, push traffic in certain areas this way or onto certain roads. But it's an enforced, it has to be enforced, or you're really not going to accomplish anything.
Anything else? Nope. Do you want to add anything?
No, I commend Mr. Faisal on his responses to that concur.
Oh, one other thing, sorry, I'm not trying to cause trouble. The parking ratios came up. My goal is 1.4. Some people will say, well, that's not enough. Other people will say you should have it lower so you encourage less travel, less parking. I take the view of encouraging is great, but if you don't supply enough parking, then it's going to lead to safety issues. So the 1.4 seems aggressive to some people, and it's not aggressive enough for other people. So to me, you really got to weigh the options, or weigh the balances of the two of what you're trying to accomplish and what's realistic to happen, and that depends on the area.
So you just said that not providing enough parking creates a safety issue?
Right. Well, you'll have people parking on the internal roadways, not in a parking space if there's not enough parking. If there's more cars than parking spaces, they're going to find somewhere to put it. They'll be parked. So that's what you want to avoid. At the same time, no offense, I don't agree with your zoning bylaw of two spaces per unit in this area. That seems too high. That's just too much asphalt and not necessary. But you also shouldn't just say, well, let's do one space per unit and, people won't drive. Certain people are going to drive no matter what. Some people don't have a choice. Some people are driving no matter what, even if they have a choice. So it's really a balance of the two.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for participating this evening. Your comments have been very helpful, and certainly something we will continue to think about as we review this project. This hearing is going to be continued until the next public hearing, which we have scheduled for May the 20th, at which point it may include a presentation by the applicant of an alternative plan, but I would note that this hearing may be rescheduled if necessary to a later date. So please keep an eye on the postings to either confirm that we will hold that hearing as planned. We obviously, should that hearing be continued, we'll be lucky enough to be able to sit here for 30 seconds and continue the hearing. Mr. Husson.
I have a question. I understand that there is an architectural firm that has been retained as a peer study.
Peer review, as
Peer
I understand
review,
it.
and- Sorry. I understand that there has been an architectural firm retained to do a peer review, and how does that fit into this alternative plan that may be presented? We're gonna hear that architect before then or after? Well, not before, clearly, but
I'll let Ms. Steinfeld tell you. She's rolling her eyes at me.
no, it'd be.
That's still, my understanding is that peer review on design, a reviewer has been engaged, and that process is continuing. That will not be ready by May 20th. So This will not include a discussion or review of whatever the comments are from that peer reviewer. It is unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Thank you.
How'd I do?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, do we have, so past the May 20th date, do we know what the next date would be now? Could we announce that, or is that yet to be decided?
June 5th is the scheduled date after that. I don't have my schedule with me, but June 5th is the
Okay.
next
So
intended hearing date.
So if we do not, if the May 20th date is postponed.
Right.
The next date, it wouldn't be a date earlier than June 5th, it would be June 5th.
It would be June 5th. That
Okay.
is correct. And we would obviously continue it on the 20th to the 5th.
Great.
Hopefully, there'll be a snowstorm.
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
just automatically, if we don't meet on the 20th?
No.
We are meeting.
You will be meeting on the 20th.
All right. If we meet on the 20th, is June 5th definitely the
Yes.
next meeting?
Yes.
No matter what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
So, hopefully, we will see all of you on the 20th. Thank you very much.
And he speaks Hebrew.
Avi, why do you speak Hebrew?
You told me that.
Why do you speak Hebrew, Avi?
I'm Israeli, I lived there for many years. My
He
family is there.
even speaks English. You have the,
Yes,
great.
my Ivrit is בסדר גמור.
Ivrit.
All right, I'll see you later. Good job tonight. My patience, you're my hero.
I'm gonna be a patient.
See you guys later. Thank
See
you.
ya, Avi.
You know, it's funny, I opened up my package, you know, it was addressed to me, and I was Avi West, and I think Avi was Jesse.
And I was you.
Oh, you got mine?
I was you, and Jesse was me. I thought it was fine. It's like musical.
I got something you always do when I just cross his name off.
No worries.
All right, I guess I have to reschedule my appearance before the whole zoning board.
Oh, is it?
June 5th.
Oh, it is June. Oh, sorry.
Fortunately, I don't think my client will kill me because of my request. If anyone's interested, it's still 0-0 after 2 periods. I had to check. And now I think I go home and fall.
Super, all right, first thing in the morning. All right. Are there any size restrictions on email?
See you, thank you. Oh, I'm gonna have a peaceful evening.